Great. Hi, Francesca.
Hi, Nadia.
So thank you for agreeing to this quick interview with me. And I prepared a number of questions for you. So the first one is, you are personally part of a number of very active communities, and you've founded a community, Greaterhan. And now I'm interested in, what does it take from your perspective to make a community functional and joyful?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I got to say, it's not so easy to answer because there's so many different ingredients, I think, that are needed for that. But yeah, I was thinking a little bit about the question, and I guess I think there's maybe two things that I would highlight, or that I think maybe are often also not so focused on. And one of them is care work. So the importance of care work, that being done and also being acknowledged and valued. And so I guess by care work, what I mean is sort of all the labor that goes into taking care of the shared space, which could be physical, but it could also be digital. And that also has to do with relationships, emotions, like tending to making sure people are okay, maybe making sure that if there's a conflict, that it's addressed. So there's a lot of different things, I guess, that could be sort of seen in the category of care work. But I think for a community to really thrive in the long term, it's super important that that is done, and that the people doing it really also get acknowledged and valued for that. And it's really not the case in many groups, because it's just not something we're so used to. And I think the other is actually about the clear purpose. And so I think that in a community, like, what really makes them thrive is if there's many ways that people can contribute and basically like plug in and bring value and grow them, but that without a purpose that's really clear and that sort of gives a direction and helps create those pathways, it's very hard to do that and to actually know, what am I contributing towards? Or you're missing like the gravitational pull in. So yeah, I think the clear purpose and valuing care work seem like two really essential ones, among many others though.
Yes, no, obviously that does make a lot of sense. And actually, I love that you mentioned those in particular, because they are sort of unnoticed often. And when you talk about purpose, we're referring to what other people might call the why of that community, sort of the deeper reason for existence.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess the thing that would make people want to join, not because they're being hired and they're getting paid and they have to be there, but because it's something that like connects with their own purpose, like reason to be, and yeah, that gives them meaning basically in their life.
Okay, yeah. And in this construct of running communities and most of the time hopefully also running very joyful communities, what would you say is the role of inner work, of what each individual has to do within themselves?
Yeah, that's a really chunky question. And I guess to me, what I find really interesting is that most of the communities, at least that I've been part of, they're quite self-organizing. And I guess not all communities are, but it is quite commonly a key characteristic. And from what I've experienced about self-organizing and like our capacity to do that, it's quite limited by how much inner work at least a certain amount of people are doing in the group. And that to actually have really healthy self-organizing practices, we need to be able to look inwards and also like be able to communicate about our own needs and also make requests and really take responsibility for ourselves. And I think that if we can't do that, which sometimes we also call like the adult to adult relating, it's very, very hard in these communities. You can get sort of lost in them sometimes, or you can end up feeling exploited or feeling like your needs are being met or getting burnt out. And I mean, there's so many different things that we've all learned over the years. I definitely have. But I think that inner work is definitely like a critical piece. And that if many people do it, you can get to a whole new level of how you're operating as a group. and like tap into really, incredible new potential.
So, you know, so far we focus sort of on communities, which can have overlap with organizations, but they don't necessarily need to be organizations. But out of what you described so far, are there any other takeaways out of your community experience that you would say are really relevant for the organizational context, and also given that you're an organizational consultant and facilitator?
Yeah, so I think that in a way, the way that we also in Greaterhan, the collective that I'm part of, think about self-organizing, and like sometimes they're called self-managing organizations, or, you know, some people use the word teal, or there's so many different, you know, concepts out there. But I think that when you have that kind of system, it actually becomes much more like a community than a traditional organization. It's not the same thing, but there's so many elements of how people interact and connect and do work and get meaning that I think really is very community-like. So I would say that they start almost like blending together, like the self-managing org and the community. And a lot of the communities also that I work with, they're often trying to professionalize, they're trying to help people really make a living through what they're doing. So they're sort of going towards becoming more like a company, let's say. So to me, that's why that intersection is really rich, and there's actually so much insight that we can take from how they operate. And I mean, I think that one is, which is probably, quite essential, is also about leadership, but also about why the people are there and why they stay, right? Because in a way, in the traditional paradigm, people are there because, yes, maybe they're excited about what the company's doing, but also they're hired, they have a salary. There is a certain control, maybe even coercive dynamic it's very low, right? Sometimes it's not very evident, but somehow, under that, there is a power over, right? In many cases, I have my boss, I've been hired, they can also just end the relationship, right? Versus if you're in more of a self-managing organization, people come in different ways, and they're more attractive again to the purpose and the meaning. And that's also how they stay, and how you can also really, I guess, sort of influence and develop that type of organization. Because the leader can't just come and say, you have to do this because I tell you so. People just won't do that, right? They say like, nope, I want to do something else, right? And instead you have to inspire, you have to connect, you have to like see how also the initiative can meet people's needs that they are maybe bringing into that space. So yeah, I think that there's a huge amount to be learned from how communities mobilize people and really get them to feel connected to the identity of the group, and to really go into action, that I think is quite essential for self-managing organizations.
So you already tapped into that a little bit, but could you talk a bit more about your understanding and definition then of leadership?
Yeah. I mean, I guess there's a lot of different behaviors, I think, that one would see in a leader in these kind of systems. And I think they do change a lot depending on the condition, the project, the situation. So I think on the whole, I would see leadership as much more dynamic and something that is adapting to the circumstances, the people who are in the room. But also, I think for me, the image really as a leader is someone who is holding space and who is facilitating the organization in a way, is something that feels very, resonant and important. And I think there's also sort of a work of like crystallizing and creating clarity and sort of articulating something. But it's very, very connected to the listening capacity, and to really, holding space for a group, seeing what is coming up, listening to that, and then helping bringing out some clarity. So I think it's much more of like a stewarding capacity, and like holding from below rather than like coming from the top. So I would sort of flip that. But as I said, to me, what I find really interesting also just in my sort of personal work relationships with my colleagues is seeing how dynamic the leadership can be, and how like in this project, you're the one who has a certain role, and this project, it's me. And it's always sort of, we can try these different roles in many different projects, and it's not very fixed. So I don't have to be the manager all the time, and I don't have to be a manager at all, right? Because no one's really managing. So I think that's actually not a useful term. But yeah, it's much more about helping potential unfold, to not sound too hippy dippy, but yeah, it's a bit like that.
So what I'm actually hearing there, Francesca, which I really like, is that in that definition, leadership is more a role than a position. Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's the process than the title in a way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely think so.
Mm.
And I definitely also think, I mean, we often use like gardening metaphors, but I think it's more like, helping a garden grow and tending to the trees and the plants rather than operating a factory, right? It's really different imagery, and it's more related to sensing and responding.
Yeah. And in your capacity as an organizational development professional and a consultant and a coach and a facilitator, when you work with organizations that embark on this journey of culture change, what are some of the most common mistakes that you see them make, or traps that they maybe stumble into?
Yeah, so I guess one of them, which is especially around, I guess, ideas that people have about self-management culture, is that they think that self-management means there is like no management, no structure, nobody's in charge, and it's just sort of chaos. And I think that is such a huge misconception, and it's quite, it really creates a lot of problems. Because yeah, people sometimes use that as sort of a justification for like, no, we don't have any structure now. It's all just gone. And instead that actually it means creating different types of structures, and that there are lots of leaders that are going to be needed, and there's always still power and all of those dynamics. So I think, that misconception definitely is very common. The other thing that I find quite interesting is like, what is the reason that you want to make this cultural change? Like, what is the why of whoever it is that is initiating it, right? That might be a leader, might be somebody else. And like, what is that authentic reason? Because I do think that there are many cases where there's a reason, which is like, I don't know, there's a trend and we feel like we have to somehow keep up, or secretly we're hoping we're going to be more efficient and profitable through this. There's many different things. But whatever that authentic reason is, I think everyone in the org will feel it. And if it isn't one that really will benefit them, it can sometimes lead to a sort of, people not getting on board or really wanting to do it because they don't see how it actually will serve them as well. And maybe just be more work.
Yeah. And it can actually, what I've experienced, also create nearly a sort of a resistance movement, nearly, if people don't feel this is something that actually matters to me. And ultimately, it's more about juicing us even more under this label of new work and self-organization. And it becomes this trope that is very, very much rejected.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think the last point that is also important, which goes beyond the culture work, but is more about the structures. So I would say like the organizational structure, the legal structure, the ownership structure. And I think if that doesn't get aligned at all as well with the culture you're trying to create, at some point you're going to have friction and you're going to get stuck. So like, for instance, if you want to have a super self-managed, distributed sort of ownership in the organization culturally, but then it's actually just owned by one person, or you're on the stock market and you have shareholders, that's probably going to create some friction at some point, because people are going to say, well, I have to step up, I have to take responsibility, but then I can't be a co-owner. Like, that doesn't make sense, right? So I think there's really a certain, I guess, integrity, or really having something be really aligned fully. And I mean, the inner work is sort of the other end of the spectrum there. But to me, that's really what's essential. And it is quite hard to find a lot of orgs out there still, I find, that really are ready for the whole thing.
Absolutely. And that actually brings us very nicely to my last question to you, which is, what is your wish for the world? I mean, I know that's a big question, but
yeah, that's a huge question. And actually, I just realized I was thinking before on it, and I was like, oh, I'll think about it last. And then I didn't come back to it. So I'm going to think about now what my wish is for the world. I mean, I think somehow this realization how connected we all are with each other, and I'm not even just talking about humans, but like how our entire globe sphere, that we are all very connected. And that even though it often doesn't feel that way, that we all have the power to change things. And that that we can feel that agency and connect with others to move these big mountains that we need to move, and not feel powerless in all of that.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that's a very timely wish. I often find that I can drop into that hole of feeling disempowered myself, and it is so important to then also stay connected, because that immediately recharges batteries in a way, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Francesca, thank you so much for this interview, and all the best of luck with Greaterhan, and I look forward to seeing you soon again.
Thank you so much, Nadia.